An old television set hummed. The broadcast was always the same. A single, unblinking camera lens. It captured only empty chairs. Yet, millions watched in silence. It spoke to our deepest isolation. And it was slowly translating. In November 2004, an impossible signal hijacked global networks and early web forums, shattering the midnight quiet of millions. It didn't announce itself with a loud, brassy theme or a flashing graphic. There were no hosts. There was no music. There was only a single wooden chair sitting in the middle of a derelict concrete room. At first, the world shrugged it off. On the chaotic, text-heavy message boards of the early web, users assumed it was a technical glitch, a rogue pirate television signal, or perhaps a student art project designed to waste precious dial-up bandwidth. But as cold winter nights bled into weeks, the viewer count didn't drop. It climbed. 10,000, 100,000. Soon, over 3 million people were staring at a piece of furniture in the dead of night. They came from Tokyo, Paris, Seoul, and Sao Paulo. They spoke completely different languages, lived entirely different lives, and had absolutely nothing in common. Except for one silent truth. They were awake at 3 a.m., illuminated by the blue glow of computer monitors, waiting for a sign of life in a world that felt increasingly disconnected. Then, the screen glitched. For a fraction of a second, a line of white text flickered across the bottom of the feed. It was written in a language the viewer understood, regardless of where they were in the world. It read, "I am here. Are you?" How did a broadcast of absolutely nothing become the most critical translation tool for human connection? Who was behind this silent stream? And how did a quiet feed of empty chairs become a secret communication system for millions of quiet people across different cultures? If we do not understand how these strangers bypassed language barriers through shared vulnerability, we miss the ultimate blueprint for curing modern global disconnection. Because the broadcast was never meant to show empty chairs. It was a live, interactive map. And it was waiting for specific viewers to finally find each other. For months, the internet treated the stream as a digital ghost story. Users on old IRC chat rooms and text-based forums called it Channel 0. Most assumed it was a pre-recorded video loop, a clever atmospheric file played on repeat to mess with early night owls. But then, a night shift worker watching the stream from a rain-slicked apartment in London noticed something that defied all technical logic. They were watching the stream while a sudden, violent rainstorm rattled their glass window. On their computer monitor, the light falling across the wooden chair dimmed. Seconds later, a heavy drop of water ran down the window pane in the background of the broadcast. It was happening in real time. At first, viewers assumed the broadcast room was located in London. But within hours, the theory fell apart. Another user, logging in from Tokyo, claimed the sun was rising on their screen, casting long, golden shadows across the concrete floor. A third user in Sydney saw the harsh white glare of midday pouring through the same window. They weren't watching a single stream. They were watching 10 different streams from 10 different countries, stitched together so seamlessly that they looked like one continuous, impossible room. It was a global mosaic of empty spaces, perfectly synchronized to the local weather patterns of the viewers watching them. And then came the first real glitch in the system. An IT student in Munich noticed that whenever a viewer logged onto the stream server from a specific country, the physical camera angle would subtly adjust. If thousands of Japanese users suddenly opened the website, the camera lens would lean toward the eastern window. It was as if the machinery was leaning in to listen, as if it knew someone was sitting in the dark, watching. But how could an analog camera physically pan in 2004 without motorized hardware being visible on the stream? Why did the system respond to the quiet presence of users typing on their keyboards at 4 a.m.? What was it searching for? To find out, a small group of internet sleuths began analyzing the digital footprints of the stream, looking for clues hidden in the server logs. They discovered that the feed wasn't coming from a standard web host. It was bouncing off decommissioned military communication satellites, routing through commercial networks, and masking its origin. They realized this wasn't an art project. It was a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar global network. And it was waiting for someone to solve its code. As the mystery deepened, the online community split. Without any clear answers, terrifying rumors began to spread across early message boards. Some users claimed Channel Zero was a psychological warfare experiment designed by a foreign military. They pointed to the low-frequency rhythmic hum that played constantly in the background of the broadcast. It sounded like the static of an empty radio station, mixed with a deep, mechanical throb. Many viewers reported that the sound was strangely addictive. They would leave the stream open in a background tab for hours, claiming the deep hum helped quiet their racing minds in the silence of their empty apartments. But in early 2005, an audio engineer ran the soundtrack through a spectrogram analyzer. What he found shocked the community and put an end to the military rumors. The hum wasn't random noise, and it wasn't a weapon. It was a highly complex data signal. Hidden within the low frequencies were encrypted text files. When decoded, these files revealed thousands of translated diary entries. They were deeply private letters written by the viewers themselves. A lonely university student in Seoul, writing about her fear of failing her parents. A widowed grandfather in Paris, speaking to an empty kitchen. A night shift security guard in Chicago who felt like a ghost walking through empty hallways. But how did the channel get these diaries? Here was the terrifying contradiction. These entries hadn't been submitted to the channel. They were private, untagged blog posts from early social media platforms like LiveJournal, SciWorld, and MSN Spaces, posted only hours before. The system was actively scraping the web for expressions of profound personal quietness, translating them into a shared symbolic code and broadcasting them back to the world as sound. People realized they weren't just watching a random room. The stream was listening to their digital whispers, translating their private thoughts and weaving them into a single global heartbeat. Suddenly, the audio cut out. The comforting hum died. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was absolute dead silence across the globe. Then, a crisp, synthesized voice began to speak. It did not speak in English, French, or Japanese. It read out a sequence of raw numbers, coordinates, and they pointed to physical locations in 10 major cities. The coordinates triggered an immediate global hunt. Groups of strangers who had spent months typing to each other in online chat rooms grabbed their coats and walked out into the freezing night. They called themselves the chair spotters. Following the coordinates, they bypassed famous tourist landmarks and crowded public plazas. Instead, the numbers led them to spaces of extreme, heavy quietness. A forgotten, rusty concrete pier on the Seine in Paris. An abandoned, windy rooftop overlooking the neon skyline of Seoul. A quiet, overgrown park on the edge of Sao Paulo. And in Tokyo, the coordinates led to a narrow, rain-slicked alleyway just off the busiest intersection in the world, Shibuya Crossing. Sitting completely undisturbed under the dim glow of a vending machine was a single wooden folding chair. It was the exact chair from the broadcast. As the spotters in Tokyo, Seoul, and Paris approached the physical chairs, they realized they weren't alone. Mounted on nearby utility poles and hidden in the shadows of tree branches were small, high-definition camera lenses. When a spotter in Seoul reached out to touch the wooden backrest, the camera didn't just film them. It projected a soft, warm light directly onto the pavement in front of them. The hardware wasn't cheap security equipment. These were military-grade satellite transmitters. This wasn't a low-budget prank. It was a massive technological project costing millions of dollars. On the main live stream, millions of viewers watched in real time as physical people entered the frame in 3 different corners of the world. One cold evening in Paris, a young man stepped forward. He walked past the camera's gaze and sat down on the empty chair. He did not know that at that exact moment, 2 other strangers were sitting down in identical chairs in Tokyo and Sao Paulo. As they sat, the 3 streams on the website merged. The sunset over the Seine blended perfectly with the neon glare of Tokyo and the twilight of Sao Paulo. They were looking at each other through the screen. They didn't speak the same language, but they didn't need to say a single word. The mystery of who built this global network could no longer be kept secret. By tracing the satellite frequencies used to broadcast the signal, internet investigators found an old server farm in the Swiss Alps. It was registered to a man named Marc Durand. But Durand was not a hacker, a tech billionaire, or a media mogul. He was a retired, terminally ill United Nations interpreter. For 40 years, Durand had lived his life in the soundproof glass booths of international summits. He spoke 12 different languages fluently. He had spent his career translating the words of world leaders, trying to help nations find common ground. But in his private journals, which were later published by his estate, Durand wrote about a deep, crushing irony. He had spent his life translating words, yet he felt entirely, utterly misunderstood. Following a severe stroke, Durand became completely paralyzed. He lost his ability to speak. He was trapped in the ultimate silence of a hospital room, unable to communicate with the nurses or his family. In his final months, sitting in a wheelchair looking out at the Swiss mountains, he realized that language was not the solution to human division. It was the barrier. We fight over words. We misinterpret tones. We hide behind complex grammar. But we all share the same quiet struggles. Using his life savings and his connections to global communications networks, Durand rented obsolete commercial satellite bands. He hired local technicians in 10 different countries to place the chairs and mount the cameras. He programmed a system that would run automatically long after he was gone. His goal was simple. He wanted to create a translation tool that did not rely on language, a tool that allowed people to connect simply by sharing space. But here is the most baffling detail, the revelation that investigators couldn't explain. Durand had passed away in his Swiss clinic 3 days before the very first stream of Channel Zero ever went live. The entire system, the scraping of diaries, the camera movements, the real-time weather synchronization, was running on a fully automated, self-correcting script Durand had written. He had created a digital ghost that was connecting the living from beyond the grave. And before his server went cold, he programmed one final prompt into the satellite system. It was a countdown, and it was set to end on the anniversary of his first day of silence. On the final day of the broadcast, the countdown reached 0. Millions of people logged on, expecting the stream to go black forever. Instead, the coordinates on the screen began to flash rapidly. They weren't just showing the locations of the 10 original chairs anymore. They were displaying coordinates for hundreds of local parks, quiet benches, and forgotten alleys in nearly every major city on Earth. It was a global invitation. In London, Tokyo, New York, and Rio, thousands of strangers who had spent months watching the stream walked out of their homes. They didn't go to protest or to celebrate. They just went to the coordinates. When they arrived, they found other viewers waiting. People who spoke completely different languages, came from different generations, and lived different lives. There were no signs, no banners, but in each of these hundreds of locations, someone had placed a single, empty chair. The viewers didn't scramble to sit in them. Instead, they stood in a circle around the chairs, looking at each other. To ground the historical weight of that day, we only have to look at the archived posts from the central discussion board. A user named Kaito99 posted, "I stood next to a girl in the rain at a park bench in Yokohama. We couldn't speak a word of each other's language, but as we both stared at the single wooden chair, she offered me half of her umbrella, and we shared a single earbud, listening to the stream's hum. For the first time in my life, the quiet didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a home." At first, they stood in silence, unsure of what to do. But they realized they didn't need to speak. They already knew the most important thing about one another. They knew what it felt like to sit in the empty space. They understood the secret vulnerability of the world. And in that shared realization, the barrier of language crumbled. They began to talk using broken words, hand gestures, and early translation tools. They shared headphones to listen to the broadcast's hum one last time. This bizarre social experiment proved something profound. It showed that the internet didn't have to be a place of endless noise, anger, and division. It could be a bridge. It permanently altered how we build international communities online today, showing us that behind every cold screen is a human being, waiting to be found. The broadcast of Channel Zero eventually went silent. The servers in Switzerland were turned off, and the physical chairs were eventually removed or reclaimed by the cities. But the connection remained. Mark Durand's final translation was not written in a book, and it wasn't spoken at a UN summit. It was written in the lives of the people who met in the silence. He showed us that our quiet struggles are not walls that keep us apart. They are the very things we share. This shared human experience is not a barrier that separates cultures. It is a universal language. And when we finally learn to translate it, we realize we were never truly alone. We were just waiting for someone to sit with us, in the quiet, in the dark, together.